Scribe Studio. I'm Brendan Peterson, one of Scribe's technical evangelists. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through some more of the event-based integration that Scribe now offers. Specifically, we're going to talk about the request reply type integrations that we offer. Now, if you are a follower of the podcast, you know that Mark and I talked recently about this same type of integration. What I want to do is take this a little bit further, go into the actual UI of Scribe, cover how this actually works, and really give you a good boost into using this in your own scenarios that you're going to come across. As a quick recap, event-based processing, event-based integration is exactly what it sounds like. So it means that instead of polling for some type of data that's out there, so polling for net change, we are waiting for something to come to us. Now, with request reply, what that means is we're waiting for something to come tell us to go do something. We're going to do some action and then tell it what we did. So again, request, reply. This is basically occurring because when we build these integrations, we build this map, we're building it and exposing it as a REST web service that people can post some JSON out to, and then we're going to get called, we're going to do something with that data. So this is really meant to be transactional. Now, what we've seen people doing with in the past, some of the use cases we've discussed up to now, has been mainly fetching data. So I'm going to go into Dynamic CRM. When I load an account form, I want to pull back some data from my ERP system. So that's basically going to say on form load, call out to Scribe. Scribe's going to go do a quick seek or a lookup, bring back some data, tell me if it was found or not found, and if it was found, populate that data on my form. So a lot of it's been that kind of, request reply as far as go look for this, bring it back to me. You can also use request reply in a real integration. So I want to take some data from someplace, persist it somewhere else, and bring back a success or failure response. So for Marketo, for example, Marketo has webhooks, and a webhook can be called based on any actions that occur in Marketo. So I could say when a user fills out a specific form in Marketo, I want that to call it to Scribe, push that user into Dynamic CRM, bring me back the CRM GUID, bring me back error message if that occurred, so that my user inside of Marketo can see that it was successfully integrated into CRM, or if it wasn't, why it was not. So that's some of the basics around this. But what we want to do is I'm going to get into the product, and let's actually show you how this looks inside the product. So what I'll do is I'll use a lead enrichment service as an example. And inside Marketo, I mentioned webhooks. This is already set up within Marketo, where I've got a lead enrichment webhook. It calls out to some REST web service. It passes it some values, and it brings some data back. So I can see this is data coming back from that web service. Inside of Scribe, I can see here I've got an event-based integration for lead enrich. So if I open that up, the first thing I'll notice, if I'm familiar with Scribe Online, is that I no longer have the 4 steps that were always there. The general, agent, map, and then schedule. There is no scheduling for an event-based integration because it is event-based. It's always there, always looking for that data to come to it. So like our native integrations with scheduled or event, it can run in the cloud, it can run on-premise. And then I'm going to have a series of maps. Now I have 2 different types of maps for event-based integrations. You can see here I've got some wait for message, which are message-based integrations. Those are waiting for an outbound message from Salesforce in this case. What I really want to work with is my request reply map. So when I open that up, I see it's pretty simple, but it's got some big changes from your normal scheduled map. First of all, your source is not a connection. Your source is simply wait for request. And when I open that up, I can see that this is that endpoint URL. This endpoint URL is blank until you save the map. So until you actually have saved this thing, you're not going to be able to have that endpoint to put into another place. So you want to make sure that you do this. The next thing you have to do is define what that request is going to look like. So this is where I define all my field parameters. I can see I've got email, and again, for my setup in Marketo, I can see I'm just passing it email. If I wanted to pass it more data, I simply would have to add additional fields, and I can define that data type with whatever it's supposed to be. So this is important because I need to make sure this matches what my request will actually look like. If I put an extra bunch of garbage data in here, it's just wasting my time of typing because if I'm not passing it in, it can't do anything. So now, when we have this set up, we cancel that, I'm going to get that data, and then I'm going to do something with it. So in this case, I'm going to look up some data, so I want to look up some lead data. I can pass across the fields that I've defined in that wait for request. So the more fields I add here, the more I'm going to get. So this way, if I want to pass more data from my other system, I can have that all existing within here. And you can do anything in here. So again, I've got a lookup block. This is really the exact same scenario we were talking about before, where I'm going to find something. But again, I've got create options. I've got upserts. I've got update insert. I've got all these different capabilities that I can utilize. So if I want to push data across, I can use a create instead of a lookup. What I do with that is I have to build some kind of response. So again, this is all, to this point we've gotten to lookup, this is all about the request. We've been asked to do something, now we're going to go do it. We have to tell that requesting application what it is that we actually did. So that's where build reply comes in. So I can see I've got an entity. The default is an entity called data. If I wanted to, I could change this to something else. I could define my own data type. It doesn't really matter for what I'm doing. But if you want to build some real complex workflows, you want to build something actually into another product, you may have this defined differently because it makes it easier on your side, on the development side, to make this work. And then I'm going to map fields across. So I can see here, I've already mapped a bunch of these fields. What I'll do is I'll remove the company field. So we delete that from my reply. If I wanted to remap that company field, all I have to do is drag and drop to the right. It actually creates that parameter for me to use in my mapping. So it's really simple for me to just drag and drop those fields left to right to create the response that I want. If I want to include other things like maybe a status column, so I can simply go in here, rename that status column, and I can provide a success status. I've got all the same different logic I can build into my transformation here, like I could in a schedule map. So if I want to use cleans, if then else, I can build all that same logic in. I simply am doing it instead of pushing data to some place. I'm building this as the reply to how I get triggered. Now, a couple other things about the build replies. I can have multiple. When people have multiple, it's generally branching based upon success or failures. So if I built this out a little bit, I can now say this is my success block, this is my failure block. This way my status information can tell me, was it found, was it not found? Did it work, did it not work? So I can branch that apart to have different replies that are built up based upon the outcome of steps as I walk through it. The biggest thing is that this send reply is the final step. You can see it's got no little tooth at the bottom of it. Nothing really to configure here. It's just exit the map with this or exit the map with an error when you get to that send. So in theory, you could have that create a custom error if you wanted. If it's based on a failure, you don't want to send a real failure reply up, you can do some work within here. But this is going to send that reply you built with the build reply blocks and send that back to the requesting application. So pretty simple to set up. Same thing goes with this as with any other scheduled maps. I could have multiple targets involved, so I could push data to CRM, fetch data from SAP, push some other piece of data to NetSuite, and then build a reply back to Marketo. So I can build these really complex workflows within here. And once you have it set, it just is there to be ready to run. So this is really, the building the map, it's just like building any other map within Scribe Online. The biggest thing you're changing, though, is that you want to build a reply. And again, depending on what your use case is, that might just be a bit field, yes and no. Yes, it worked, no, it didn't. Or, like in my case, it's going to be much more complex where I'm feeding back a lot more data than I passed in. So I passed in an email, I got back all this rich lead enrichment data. So depending on your use case, this is going to vary. And depending on your use case, you might have something like Marketo, which makes it very easy to build these things up. Or you might have to be doing this all in custom scripting language to invoke this and fetch some data back. It's all going to come across as JSON, so it's just JSON parsing. It's pretty easy to do. I'll say this, if I can do it, most people can do it. I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer by any stretch, and I've managed to get a lot of this done. So it's not the most impossible thing in the world. The last piece I want to bring up about the Scribe component of this. It's easy to set these things up. There's one big hurdle though. Now, when we built this, you can imagine, when we built Scribe Online, it's a big multi-tenanted app that's out there in the cloud. We have to be very careful with how we do some of these accessibility options, because if we just open it up, it's opening a lot of risk. And that's something we want to avoid. So it took us a while to get to this point. In order to allow any of these applications to call into your tenant, you have to, you kind of have to grant them access. So if I look at my organization tab, under security, by default, this is what it looks like. Nothing there. So by default, we don't allow anything to talk to your tenant, your organization. This is, again, it's just the easiest default of saying, no one can get in. In order to allow an application to call out to that event-based map, you have to grant it access. So my rule could be, I'll call this my Marketo rule. I want to allow it event solution access. API access is a little bit different. We have an API inside of Scribe that allows you to start, stop, and check for status on integrations. You would allow API access by that checkbox, but because I'm not using that, I don't want to allow it. And the default range that it goes to is just everything. So if you're not really worried about this, you can open it up completely wide open. You're good to go. If you have more of a stringent IT policy, you might want to define a range. So I'll define a range of that. Copy and paste to make it easier on myself. So I've got a 20 IP range that's going to come across from Marketo. So I can go ahead and save that now. And now I've only allowed requests from that endpoint range to access my solutions. What I also have here as far as security measures is that each endpoint URL, you can see, is kind of long, but it has this access token in it. So this access token is a GUID that is tied directly to your organization. And I can see that down here as well, my event access token. If I wanted to, if I feel that I've now risked, something's at risk, I've been hacked, whatever reason it might be, you can reset that. And you can do that as many times as you want. You just have to go back to all your URLs and replace that access token. So that's the big, the big gotcha, is that if you do this, it changes it for every URL that you've used for event-based integrations. But that security is the biggest thing you need to make sure you set up. It's the one thing that people generally forget. The nice thing is that most of these applications, Scribe gives you a nice, robust error back if you're trying to call it without having that security set up. It tells you that it hasn't been set up. You have to go in and do it. So it doesn't leave you out in a lurch guessing at what's happening. It gives you a really good, robust error back. But that's the setup within Scribe. So the mapping is pretty much the same as far as how you're going to build a logic. You're just simply going to be building a reply and sending it off to something. And then the security setup is just a new thing because of the polling integrations. You never had to do that. Now you have to make sure you define some security to allow that application to call into Scribe.